appreciated that time yesterday. We were able to break down some NFL. We're going to go SEC football. It's college football time for me. It usually is the case post July 4th. We've been breaking down some of the SEC football futures that I like throughout the week. We're going to do a recap tomorrow with Ray G and discuss them further. But we have a lot to get through because yesterday I know we got cut short. Now, I don't personally have any of my personal projections that are worth betting as far as Auburn, Mississippi State, and Arkansas go. But I do want to just kind of give my brief synopsis of each of these teams. Auburn, I have them as my 25th best team in the country. I project 6.7 wins this year. Phil Steele's at 26. PFF has them at 15th. PFF, they're a little more priors and recruiting heavy based on what I've seen on their preview. So a lot of the SEC teams are a little bit higher than some others. Not surprised they have Auburn higher, but personally they lose their top three receivers. Bo Nix, while we had hoped he maybe would learn how to pass, he really hasn't figured it out. He hasn't progressed there. And now they bring in Brian Harsin from Boise State and Mike Bobo, who is a pass-happy offensive coordinator, to try to throw with Bo Nix to receivers they don't have. I think their leading receiver was like 5th on the depth chart last year that's returning. I just don't see how it happens. Now, they do have one of the best secondaries in the country. Defensively, they should be great. I think it's a team that you can at least peg on early. While I don't like any of the futures opportunities right now on the board, I think you could look to bet Auburn football unders early in the season if the market doesn't adjust for, one, the fact I don't think Bo Nix can throw and the offense won't be very good, and that defensively they should be great. We'll move to Mississippi State. I have them as my 32nd best team in the country this year. Phil Steele's at 33. Now, PFF has them at 55. That's a pretty big discrepancy. Disagree pretty heavily there to be 20 spots plus behind me. I project 6.2 wins, so right around where the market currently sits at 6. Year one under Mike Leach was super swingy, right? Remember that LSU game to start the season? They end up upsetting them, and defenses kind of learn after a couple of games, especially SEC defenses that are pretty tough. Hey, we can just rush 3 and drop 8. And the air raid really at that point was stagnant. They couldn't score. They bring in now a QB transfer, Jack Abram from Southern Miss, that they hope can at least try to help in that regard. They got, I think, Mikal Polka transfer from Cal that should help. But their strength is defensively as well, similar to Auburn, and which is kind of at least somewhat surprising for a Mike Leach squad. So I guess part of me wants to believe, and I think I do put some upside in having Jack Abram transferring in at quarterback, that Mike Leach's offense can at least be better than average, which they weren't last year. And then defensively, if they're in that like top quartile in the country, then maybe they are like a 7 or 8 win team potentially. But on average, I have it projected against 6.2. Nothing there for me. And I will say this: last year they were 4th in EPA per pass allowed last year in the SEC. So they bring back Martin Emerson, and PFF graded him as the 11th best cornerback in the entire country. So he'll be playing another season, and that's what they'll have to rely on. Another team that maybe, if the Mike Leach offense and the air raid just doesn't work, you can be looking at unders early in the season. And last, Arkansas. Before we move on to a few more of the teams, just sneak in my top 40. I have them 40th, but I project 5.3 wins. The market's right at 5.5. Nothing really to be had there. And by the way, Phil Steele, PFF have them right in that 51 to 53 range for their rating. So I'm a little more bullish on Arkansas than they are. And I was thinking like, hey, maybe we'll get, an Arkansas over 4.5 or 5. No, the market's a lot closer to where I'm at. So I think the 5.5 wins is fair. They have a 4-star quarterback. I think it's KJ Jefferson, I believe is his name. He had 1 start last year in 2020, and he should be throwing to Treylon Burks every time he possibly can. He's a top 10 receiver, will be an NFL guy. He grades out as the 8th best receiver returning this year at PFF. And Kendall Briles, man, I've loved him ever since his days at Baylor. He goes over to Florida Atlantic, and with Lane Kiffin, they had a great offense even at Houston. And then it was a really weird season when he was at Florida State that just completely everyone fell off the map there. And I think him being there at Arkansas can kind of rejuvenate this offense, and that kind of my bullishness, I think, resides in the fact that Briles can scheme up enough to get them at least to 5 wins, but I think 6 potentially enough. So I guess I would lean over if I had to, just because I feel like I've been extremely cautious upgrading Arkansas in the offseason, despite them already being one of my most upgraded teams, and a little bit more bullish than some other some other people that are projecting and forecasting. Let's move over, Quan, as we wrap through these. I know I'm throwing a lot at you, but we wanted to get all of the SEC teams in. We have, I believe, do you have Missouri? Let's do the Missouri one if we have that next. They were my next team that I have rated in the SEC. We'll get the right graphic up there, but Missouri, they're my 48th ranked team in the country. There they are. All right, we're good. We got it. Even though they're next to Vanderbilt, they're a lot better than Vanderbilt. They're not the worst team in the SEC. So they're 48th. and I have them projected to win 6.5. So under 7, somewhat enticing, but this is, I think so. A lot of my priors, a lot of my projections are based on personnel. I also incorporate coaching stuff. I incorporate recruiting. You have Connor Bazelak returning. He came off the bench, fared pretty well through the air last year once he took over. But I love Eli Drinkwitz. He's, I think, one of the best coaches in football. He was at Appalachian State. He was year one in a weird COVID-ridden, like bubble-ish NBA-style season with a lot of cancellations, not a lot of practices. And this is now year 2 under Drinkwitz. And I think that the upside for Missouri is a lot higher than the downside. So that's why I would not bet under 7, despite my numbers saying it's close, or at least maybe worth a small bet. And so, they have a play action pass, heavy attack that I think they can utilize and use to their advantage. And I will say that Steve Wilkes is actually taking over the defense this year, which ranked 107th in EPA last year. Was one of the worst in football. And I think Steve Wilkes, he was the DC at the Carolina Panthers when they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Broncos. So then he ends up getting a head coaching position with the Cardinals. Only lasted 1 year. They get rid of him. He was a defensive coordinator for the Browns. Back when the Browns fell apart. But now he's a defensive coordinator for Missouri football. So I think there's enough surrounding both sides of the football that even though my numbers say 6.5, I'm not betting an under 7. So I do like Missouri. Just sneak inside my top 50. Let's go back now to the Kentucky graphic. I have them 55th. And this is one of the biggest discrepancies in any team I have rated versus PFF's college preview. They have them at 17th. I should text them and ask why. Kentucky's not a top 17 team in the country. They don't have that much talent. Personally, I don't think so. Phil Steele, for context, is 50th. So he's higher than me. I guess I'm a little bit bearish on Kentucky. I think part of me wonders, for one, that they've relied on this rush game because they've had injury at quarterback. It was Lynn Bowden, you know who I'm talking to? He was a receiver turned quarterback, and they basically just ran every play, and everyone knew they were running every play. They'd stack 8 in the box, and they were still extremely explosive and found ways to win games. So I think they deserve some credit there. By the way, my win projection 6.9. So I think the 7's fair. I think the market's right. But I am shocked. PFF, I think, had them projected more like 8 wins. And again, they think they're a top 20 team. I'm not quite there. The rushing attack could still be one of the best in the SEC, but they are trying to pivot to a more pro-style offense. They bring in Will Levis, a transfer from Penn State that can run, but it's not going to be like Bowden, man. He's a guy that I think he got some run in the NFL, like a special teams kind of do-it-all utility guy, and it's going to be a lot different. And by the way, if you remember Joey Gatewood, transfer from Auburn, who just hasn't been able to find his place, he's also in the mix potentially with Will Levis to be the quarterback. I think it'll end up being the Penn State transfer, though. We'll go Tennessee. I'm projected 5.4 wins. Market is 6.5. You can get under. I saw the best price, minus 125. Some spots are juiced a little higher, so they agree. I think people have been betting Tennessee, and they lost a lot in the transfer portal, especially defensively. So they had one defender that I would say their top 5 defenders, one went to the NFL. The other 4 transferred out. And if it wasn't for the fact, honestly, that they bring in Josh Heupel, who has been at UCF and just been scoring points like mad, and Hendon Hooker, transfer from Virginia Tech, that I think can be a quarterback that Heupel can utilize efficiently, I would really, really, really like this Tennessee under. I'm projected more like 5.5 wins again, and we're getting a 6.5 if you can get juice. I think minus 150 or better is way good. You can even bet plus monies at 6 if you have those at some other books. Heupel's last year, UCF, they ran play action at a top 10 rate, 45% of the time. So in the SEC, you wonder, okay, well, that might not work as well. UCF was playing weaker defenses. Heupel was actually the OC in Missouri, I believe, in 2017. And they finished 16th in EPA against an SEC defense, a conference and schedule that had a ton of them thrown at him. So I think he can have success. I'm not sure if it's Hendon Hooker that can have that type of success, though. It's a little different beast. But the losses defensively, even with the potential upside with Heupel taking over and some offense, defensively, I think they're going to be a mess. But it is a team I'm looking at. Like I said, I kind of have circled Auburn unders early. If the market doesn't adjust, Tennessee overs should be a thing. Their defense will be really bad. And if Heupel and UCF and playing with pace and everything isn't efficiently accounted for in the market early, I think we'll get some opportunities there. I will say this last thing, though. Scott Frost, also former UCF, he goes to Nebraska. Everyone expects, Nebraska's going to be a lot better now. They really haven't been. So just because you've had success at, say, a group of 5 school like UCF, and you're making the move to Big Ten or SEC, it doesn't guarantee necessarily that the offense in Tennessee will make that jump. We have South Carolina, last one here on this graphic. and then we'll talk a little bit of Vanderbilt because I do have a bet on Vandy. South Carolina, they're my 83rd ranked team. Phil Steele's at 88, PFF at 73 for what it's worth. I'm projected 3.8. Most of the market is Ford juiced way under. It's like I think it's a minus 145 range on the under. So maybe some sharp action early. I'm not sure if it ever was at 4.5. That would have been bettable versus my number, but they returned 58% of their production from last season, which generally would be slightly below average. But we've talked about it this season. Looking at the extra year of eligibility, the NCAA granted all of the players, the national average is like 77% returning production per team per school rather than 63%. So South Carolina is actually 119th in returning production. Right? They're extremely inexperienced. They're bringing Luke Doty, a quarterback, grades out as the worst quarterback in the SEC via PFF. They're basically in rebuild mode after coming off of their worst record they've had in the entire century, I believe it is. It was like over 100 years since South Carolina had a worse record. And first-time head coach, Shane Beamer taking over, son of Frank Beamer. So rebuilding in the SEC with the lack of talent, first-year head coach, I just don't see a lot going right for South Carolina. So the 4 juiced under I think is fair. And last one, Quan, good work over there. We're going to go to Vanderbilt. They were stacked over there with Missouri. I should have caught that earlier. I'm not going to blame you. I should have realized that Missouri wasn't next. Vandy, 104th. So they're just outside my top 100. Phil Steele has them 115, PFF 106. But so maybe I'm a little bit bullish relative to some others. I have them projected just under 4 wins. Just under. It's like 3.97 wins. So I do like the over, and I feel like I've been a little bit cautious with some Vandy love. They ranked second to last in EPA last season, last in EPA allowed. It can't get much worse. All right, so I'll start with that. But I liked Ken Seals at quarterback, true freshman who got plenty of reps, and they did improve offensively pretty significantly the last month of the season. And he was particularly good. PFF in their preview, they actually show hot spots in certain pockets and certain parts of the field that the quarterbacks throw into. And he was particularly strong. I think he was like 11th in the country throwing in the seams. And so Clark Lee now, new head coach coming over. He was a DC at Notre Dame. But they bring in David, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, Ray, I believe, R-A-I-H. So I didn't want to botch it. I could be wrong on some of these names. But David Ray comes in from the NFL. He had been studying under Cliff Kingsbury, has some air raid tendencies. They bring him in now behind second year of Ken Seal. So I thought did a really good job in the SEC, all things considered, as a true freshman, who already graded out as a freshman, really good throwing into the seam. Now you're going to have this air raid going against zones. And if Seals can hit the pockets and hit those seams, I think there's a ton of upside for Vanderbilt's offense. And again, now you have a head coach that's extremely defensive-minded. After ranking last in the SEC and EPA allowed, Clark Lee is going to probably, after being at Notre Dame, I think improve the defense. And they're one of the teams that does bring back quite a bit experience-wise within the SEC, who a lot of those better teams, the reason that they're losing guys, they're losing them to the NFL. Vanderbilt didn't have too many guys going to the NFL. So I like the Vandy over 3.5. Let's do a recap. We're going to bring up the graphic of all of my bets this week, and we're going to run them by Ray. I told you guys this is a smaller play. My projection 16, but if you can get the hook on the 17, I think Miami week 1 against Alabama plus 17.5 is worthwhile. Week 1, by the way, last night at Jazz. For people that know, Jazz books. You can get Georgia at plus 4.5. Everywhere else, 4 is the best price I saw. I would bet it at plus 3.5 or better. I am bullish Georgia. We talked about that plenty. JT Daniels. I think the offense can kind of go to another level that Georgia really hasn't seen before. And then a Kirby Smart Georgia defense that just got a couple of transfers in recently. I think will be tops of the country again. 8-1 or better on the title. Tennessee, we just talked about under the 6.5, minus 150 or better. Vanderbilt over 3.5 wins. And I believe that was actually plus money. You can get like a plus 105 there. I'm closer to a 4-win season for Vandy. And to win the Heisman, Matt Corral, 30-1 or better. I think it's worth a shot. I think there's a chance Ole Miss is really, really good. Extremely good, at least offensively. It's either going to be a team that, every game is 70s, 80s, and their defense never improves, or they improve to somewhat average defensively, and then their top 10 offense is one of the best. And I hit on this yesterday very briefly, but I want to give a shout-out to Tailgate Tent, who broke down predicted points added, and he basically did a weighted runs created plus from baseball, but weighted predicted points added plus, and did it for every quarterback, every position, actually. So it's kind of where are you at in predicted points added, which is a metric that's pretty efficient. It's good at predicting, how good you are. And then when he weights it, it's relative to like an average player in the league or an average quarterback. Last year, number 1 in the league, the country, Mac Jones would not be a surprise. Number 2, Kyle Trask. Number 3, Matt Corral. Right, this is first year under Lane Kiffin. Justin Fields was next, then Brock Purdy, Sam Howell, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Dylan Gabriel, and Derek King, by the way, Miami plus 17.5. If he's healthy and good to go, he was elite last season. So Matt Corral's the best quarterback in this weighted, predicted, created plus that Tailgate 10 threw together. Best one coming back, and you can get them to win the Heisman. If they get to 9 or 10 wins, Ole Miss is somewhat in the mix. They pull off one big upset, which they almost did anyway last year against Alabama. I think we got a shot. I know I just ran through so much SEC talk, but we needed to get it out. We got to get it done. A lot of numbers. We'll clip some of these off. We'll have team previews up on the YouTube channel. But Quan, you just saw, let's throw up one more time, recap of my bets for SEC. Is there anything there that you heard today? I know we went mainly Tennessee and Vandy, or anything that you just like as a fan, someone that's in the mix, anything you'd like a lot, disagree with here, anything you'd follow? Then I can switch the other side. So if you like it, then I can actually say I hate it.
I think
he's studying. He's trying to figure out which play is going to mush for me. I hope it's not Georgia. I have some pretty good sized wagers pending on them to win the national title. You can, if you want, you can just mush Tennessee into a 7-win season. That would probably be okay.
I think the Bama Miami week 1.
You think it's just a blowout?
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, 17.5 is a lot. That's like,
it's a lot.
Yeah.
You can be down 24 and just backdoor at the end, and you
Yeah.
cover it, land 17 a good amount of the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and they have brand new offense, like across the board.
Yeah.
It's so good as Bryce Young, I believe, right? The number 1 recruit coming in to play quarterback for Alabama. They lose all their receiving weapons. Now, the thing is, Alabama just has next guy up. It normally doesn't matter. But if Miami's like a top 15-ish team, then I do think it's a little high.